Dakota Territory, 15th January 1887, Northern Plains. Signal service stations across Dakota and Montana logged dawn temperatures between -40 degrees Fahrenheit and -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Cattle losses in some northern range districts approach half the herds. Local papers later call it the Great Die-Up. Snow lies hard around small homestead cabins, 14 by 16 or 16 by 20 feet, plank floors slung on joists over open air. Inside, county histories and farm memoirs remember ice on water pails, frost rings around nail heads, and children ordered to sleep in wool socks and boots just to face the boards at dawn. Along the Missouri and its tributaries, earth lodges and sod houses sit partly in the ground, wrapped in earth and timber. Observers write that these structures stay warm in winter and cool in summer, even in the same cold snap. This episode reconstructs a third path, a shallow stone-filled belly under a light cabin floor, turning river rock into a low masonry heat battery. The question is simple. In a winter like 1886 to 1887, does the extra digging and hauling beat 3 more cords of wood? Land office maps and agricultural reports outline the typical claim. 160 acres, a primary cabin 14 by 18 or 16 by 20 feet, raised 12 to 24 inches on stones or short posts, plank floor directly over joists, with open air underneath. Homesteader accounts describe cold floors, rag rugs, straw mats, and nailed-down carpets as the main defenses against radiating cold from below. Common materials, 1-inch pine floorboards, 2 by 8 joists at roughly 16-inch centers, sill logs or 6 by 6 skids, minimal skirting. A standard sheet iron or cast iron stove output, relative to room volume, could heat the upper half of a small cabin adequately, but the physics at floor level told a different story. Period carpentry manuals noted that ventilation beneath floors preserves timbers. This was true. Open-air circulation under a raised floor prevented moisture accumulation, rot, and insect damage to joists and sills. The cost of that preservation appeared in winter memoirs. Frost around the tacks in the floor. Children crying when their feet touched the boards. Ice forming inside the cabin while the stove glowed red. The mechanism was straightforward. Raised, well-ventilated foundations reduced rot but massively increased convective heat loss. Cold exterior air swept freely under the floor. The thin planks, only 1 inch thick, conducted heat rapidly. A family might maintain 70 degrees Fahrenheit near the ceiling while the floor hovered just above freezing. The temperature gradient from ankle height to standing height could exceed 20 degrees. Fuel consumption reflected this imbalance. Families burned wood not primarily to heat the living space, but to compensate for continuous losses through the floor. A stove loaded at bedtime would keep the ceiling warm for hours, but by dawn, the boards were cold enough to freeze standing water. The paradox, the best practice for dry timbers, created the worst possible conditions for bare feet at dawn. Engineering to prevent one problem, rot, guaranteed another, relentless heat loss. The solution accepted across the northern plains prioritized the longevity of wood over the comfort of people. Grit and snow sifted through cracks between floorboards onto the open space below. In a typical winter, this arrangement cost families extra cords of wood, extra hours tending fires through the night, and a grinding daily discomfort that became normalized simply because everyone else endured it too. Even with a red-hot stove, a northern plains cabin could have a ceiling near 70 degrees Fahrenheit and a floor only a few degrees above freezing. The lumber and layout guaranteed that mornings started with burning wood just to make the boards tolerable. Ethnographic accounts and traveler descriptions documented a fundamental contrast visible within miles of each other on the same landscape. Conventional settler cabins above ground and well-aired faced one set of thermal conditions. Earth lodges and settler dugouts using earth and sod as thermal mass faced entirely different conditions. Mandan and Hidatsa Earth Lodge communities maintained structures of remarkable sophistication. Large circular plans, heavy timber frames, willows and thatch, 2 to 3 feet of earth cover, entry tunnels below grade, central fires. Interior volumes supported multiple families. Observers consistently noted steady winter temperatures and reduced fuel needs. The structural mass made the difference. Earth and timber combined to create high-mass envelopes that changed temperature slowly. When outdoor air dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, the interior of an earth lodge might hold near 40 degrees Fahrenheit with only a modest fire. The earth itself, tons of soil over the roof and partway up the walls, acted as insulation and thermal mass simultaneously. Settler dugouts and sod houses replicated part of this advantage. 3 earth walls cut into a bank, front wall framed, roof of poles, brush, and sod. Floors often compacted clay or occasionally planks laid directly on earth. School materials and county histories praised these structures as warm in winter and cool in summer, though they also noted drawbacks: dampness, darkness, and vermin. The physics required no formal training to understand. High-mass earth contact structures change temperature slowly, reducing nighttime swings and peak fuel demand. Low-mass, aired underfloors change temperature quickly, creating sharp nighttime cooling at floor level and necessitating constant fuel input to maintain comfort. Typical reports from families who transitioned from dugouts to raised floor frame cabins mentioned the irony clearly. The better house was often colder and more expensive to heat. What had been marketed as progress in housing, moving from earth to lumber, from contact with soil to separation from it, came with a thermal penalty that many families had not anticipated. The indigenous builders and some immigrant settlers who relied on mass and earth contact had solved a problem that mainstream homestead construction ignored. The knowledge existed. The methods worked. The question was whether conventional cabin builders would acknowledge the lesson or continue prioritizing appearance and timber longevity over fuel efficiency and comfort. On the same landscape, one family walked barefoot on packed earth at -20 degrees Fahrenheit, while another stepped from bed onto planks so cold they froze water pails solid overnight. The difference was not the stove. It was the mass. Root cellars provided the observational foundation for the experiment. Built into hillsides or excavated below grade, lined with stone and earth, these structures maintained temperatures near the mean annual ground temperature, roughly 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, in the northern plains, regardless of surface conditions. Farm bulletins advised cellar depths of 6 to 8 feet and stone lining thickness of at least 1 foot for reliable winter storage. Simple temperature readings using mercury thermometers, common by the 1880s, showed the contrast clearly. A root cellar wall in January might hold 48 degrees Fahrenheit, while the air 6 feet away, outside the door, registered -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Potatoes stored on stone shelves did not freeze even in severe cold waves. The mass of earth and stone buffered against daily and seasonal swings. Inside a typical raised floor cabin, the opposite condition prevailed. Floor-level temperatures at dawn might match outdoor temperatures within 5 to 10 degrees. Ceiling temperatures near the stove could reach 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The structure offered no thermal mass to moderate swings or store heat between firing cycles. The experimental proposition emerged from comparing these two realities. If a root cellar, essentially a stone-lined hole in the ground, could maintain stable temperatures with no active heating, what would happen if the principle were inverted, placing the mass inside the heated envelope rather than outside it? The concept: excavate a shallow pan inside the cabin footprint, fill it with dense river stone to create thermal mass, lay floor planks over the stone, and bank the perimeter to keep the mass inside the building's insulated boundary. Heat from the stove, instead of escaping through gaps under the floor, would warm the stone. The stone, in turn, would radiate heat back into the room over many hours, smoothing out temperature swings and reducing fuel demand. The case study cabin, 16 by 24 feet interior, roughly 384 square feet. 8 to 9 feet wall height, loft above, central stove. Conventional option, raised joists over open air, basic stone piers, minimal skirting. Proposed variant, excavated pan inside footprint, sand bed, 4 to 6 inches of river stone. Sleepers, plank floor above, stove heat feeding the mass. Core design questions emerged immediately. Excavation depth. How much soil removal balanced effort against benefit? Stone tonnage. How much mass was necessary to store meaningful heat? Moisture management. How to prevent rot in wood resting near earth? Heat coupling. How to ensure stove heat actually warmed the rock rather than bypassing it? Agricultural bulletins on cellar depth and frost, combined with engineering tables for heat capacity of stone and wood, provided rough guidance. Stone held roughly twice the heat per pound compared to wood, and far more per cubic foot given its density. A 4-inch layer of stone across 384 square feet represented roughly 8 to 12 tons of mass, potentially storing enough heat from an evening fire to moderate floor temperatures through the night. The rest of this account follows that reconstruction step by step. How much digging, how many tons of rock, and whether the physics prove strong enough to matter at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Standard construction sequence. Set sill logs or skids on grade, add posts where necessary, frame walls, and roof. The goal was speed, a weather-tight structure in days, not weeks. Most families arriving on claims in spring or early summer needed shelter before the first hard frost. Every day spent building was a day not breaking sod or planting. The stone belly sequence reversed priorities. Excavation came first. The footprint measured 16 by 24 feet, 384 square feet of surface area. Target excavation depth, 8 to 12 inches below surrounding grade. This created a shallow pan that would later hold the stone mass. Soil volume removed, roughly 4.3 to 6.4 cubic meters, equivalent to 7 to 10 cubic yards. For 2 adults working with hand tools, spade, shovel, mattock, the labor estimate ranged from 4 to 6 full days, depending on soil conditions. Compacted prairie subsoil, dense with grass roots, resisted digging far more than loose garden earth. The work pattern, strip sod in sections, stack for later use in banking. Dig to target depth, maintaining a slight crown at the center or cutting a shallow French drain trench to one edge with a small gravel sump for moisture management. Tamp the exposed subsoil with a section of log to create a firm base. Neighboring claims followed conventional practice. Cabins rose from grade level to roof in a matter of days. The stone belly site remained a pit, visibly behind schedule by every standard metric. Comments from visitors reflected the disconnect. Still digging when you should be framing. The delay was intentional, but the social cost to appearing slow, overly cautious, impractical, was real. Agricultural research on soil temperature profiles supported the excavation logic. Measurements showed that even a few inches below grade, soil temperatures lagged surface air temperatures by hours and moderated daily swings significantly. At 12 inches depth, the thermal environment was notably more stable than at the surface, especially in winter when surface soils froze solid while subsoil remained workable. Period advice on banking houses with earth for winter insulation acknowledged the same principle. Bringing the insulated envelope closer to stable ground temperatures reduced heat loss. Excavating inside the footprint extended that logic further, pulling the thermal boundary down into the earth rather than suspending it above grade on posts and air. The grading details mattered. A slight center crown or a shallow drainage channel ensured that any moisture infiltration from construction, condensation, or rare groundwater seepage moved toward a controlled exit rather than pooling under the floor. A small gravel sump at the low corner allowed periodic inspection and drainage if needed. By mid-July, the excavation was complete. The footprint no longer read as a building site. It looked like an empty masonry pan waiting to be filled. Most neighbors would have stopped once they had a level surface for piers. This layout kept going until the entire interior resembled a shallow, blank reservoir, the preparatory stage for the mass that would define the system. Stone selection began at the river bar, a half-mile from the claim. Dense river stone, 3 to 6 inches thick, hand-liftable by a single adult, formed the target inventory. Soft or laminated pieces, shale, weak sandstone, were rejected. The goal was durable rock that would hold its shape under load and resist crushing as planks and sleepers pressed down from above. A sand bed came first, 1.5 to 2 inches of river sand spread across the excavated pan and tamped firm. This layer provided a stable, level base for the stone, prevented point loading on irregular subsoil, and acted as a capillary break to slow moisture movement from below. Target stone depth: 4 to 6 inches of tightly packed rock across the entire 384 square feet. Volume calculation: roughly 3.6 to 5.4 cubic meters of stone. Mass estimate: 8 to 12 metric tons, given typical river stone density of 2.2 to 2.5 tons per cubic meter. Logistics determined the timeline. A wagon loaded safely with 1,000 to 1,500 kilograms of stone per trip could haul perhaps 1 to 1.5 tons. Total trips required: 6 to 10 round trips from bar to site. Distance: 1 kilometer round trip, including loading time at the bar and unloading at the excavation. With 2 adults and older children working, the process required 3 to 4 full days of continuous hauling. Period farm and freight data confirmed these estimates. Typical wagon capacities for stone, grain, or ore ranged from 1,000 to 2,000 pounds, with lighter loads preferred for rough terrain or long distances. Teams worked in cycles, 2 to 3 hours pulling, then rest, water, and reharnessing. Overloading risked broken axles, lamed horses, or stuck wagons in soft ground. Laying method: largest stones placed first, staggered rather than stacked in regular courses. Gaps between large stones filled with smaller pieces and additional sand. The final stone surface settled roughly 4 inches below the intended finished floor level, leaving room for sleepers and planks. The work was visible and quantifiable in ways that abstract thermal performance was not. Neighbors passing the site saw wagon after wagon of stone being hauled and placed. Some understood the thermal logic immediately, recognizing parallels to masonry heaters, tile stoves, or earth lodges. Others saw wasted labor, time and draft power spent on mass that contributed nothing to walls, roof, or immediate weather protection. By the end of July, the stone belly was complete. The excavated pan, once empty, now held more rock than many chimney bases in the county combined. The physical investment was undeniable: days of digging, days of hauling, tons of material moved by hand and hoof. The question shifted from, can they do this? To, what does 10 tons of stone actually buy in a Dakota winter? Conventional floor framing: joists spanning from sill to sill, open air beneath, airflow prioritized over contact with earth. The standard approach assumed that separation and ventilation prevented rot. Moisture was the enemy, mass was irrelevant. Stone belly floor framing inverted this assumption. Sleepers, 4x4 or 4x6 timbers placed at 18 to 24-inch centers, rested directly on the compacted sand and stone. No posts, no open air, no reliance on air circulation to keep wood dry. Mass was prioritized over air, but moisture control could not be ignored. Sleeper preparation: each timber received a coating of lime wash or pine tar on all surfaces that would contact stone or sand. Lime wash, made from slaked lime mixed with water, penetrated wood fibers and created an alkaline barrier that discouraged rot and insect activity. Pine tar, distilled from resinous wood, provided a waterproof seal. Period carpentry manuals recommended one or both treatments for any timber touching earth or masonry. Placement required precision. Each sleeper was seated firmly on the stone layer, leveled with a carpenter's level, and adjusted using small stone wedges where necessary to achieve a flat plane across all members. Gaps between sleepers and stone were minimal. Contact, not separation, was the goal. Plank flooring, 1-to-1 and 1/4-inch boards, either tongue and groove or square-edged, nailed crosswise to the sleepers. Tighter fitting boards reduced drafts and improved the thermal seal between room air and the stone mass below. In tongue and groove installations, each board locked to its neighbor, creating a nearly continuous surface with minimal gaps. Moisture defenses extended beyond treated sleepers. Where available, improvised paper or felt acted as capillary breaks between wood and stone, slowing moisture wicking without creating an impermeable vapor barrier that could trap condensation. The sand bed beneath the stone also functioned as a drainage layer, allowing any accumulated moisture to migrate laterally toward the perimeter vents rather than pooling under the floor. Ventilation strategy acknowledged seasonal needs. Small, high-foundation vents or removable floorboards near the perimeter allowed summer drying when humidity and condensation risk were highest. In winter, these vents were sealed with wooden plugs and clay to prevent cold air infiltration and keep the stone mass inside the thermal envelope. Farm bulletins on damp basements and foundation ventilation reinforced the principle. Wood in contact with masonry or earth required both barrier treatments and seasonal air access to prevent decay. The stone belly floor applied both lessons, relying on coatings for direct protection and controlled ventilation for long-term moisture management. From above, the completed floor read as a simple plank surface, unremarkable, conventional, indistinguishable from thousands of other cabin floors across the territory. From below, it sat on what was effectively a shallow, solid slab, a continuous mass of stone and sand inside the building envelope, something rare on the open plains before concrete became widely available. The structural stage was complete. The question now was thermal. Would the stove heat the stone, and would the stone hold that heat long enough to matter? Usual practice: leave foundation open, perhaps with minimal plank skirting. Accept drafts as the price of dry timbers. Air circulation beneath and around the sill logs was considered essential for preventing moisture accumulation. The trade-off, continuous cold air washing under the floor and into the living space, was accepted as unavoidable. Stone belly system. Deliberately bank and seal to keep heat inside the building envelope. The stone mass only functioned as a heat battery if it shared the same insulated boundary as the family. Any gap to the outdoors turned the mass from asset to liability, radiating stored heat outward into the night rather than upward into the room. Banking: 10 to 16 inches of earth and sod piled against exterior walls to sill level. The material came from the original excavation, now reused to create a continuous thermal barrier around the base of the cabin. The berm sloped gently away from the walls to shed rain and snowmelt, preventing water from pooling against the logs. Skirting: rough boards closing any remaining gaps beneath the sill. Logs, particularly at corners and where banking could not be packed tightly. The skirting was not decorative. It was a functional wind barrier, stopping low-level air movement that would otherwise wash heat from the stone mass and underfloor cavity. Internal sealing: clay and straw or lime mortar pressed where the floor planks met the sill logs, plugging former air paths at ankle height. Every gap represented a thermal leak, allowing room air to escape and cold exterior air to infiltrate. The sealing work required patience, crawling along the perimeter, pressing compound into joints, smoothing with dampened hands. but the cumulative effect of dozens of small leaks when closed was significant. Seasonal adjustment, banking opened or reduced in spring for drying, then reapplied in autumn for winter. This cycle acknowledged that moisture management and thermal management had opposite requirements. Summer needed air movement and drying. Winter needed sealed boundaries and retained heat. Farm advice articles from the 1880s promoted winter banking for farmhouses and barns, noting fuel savings and improved comfort. Warnings about unprotected foundations focused on freeze-thaw damage to masonry and increased pest access, but the thermal benefit of earth barriers was widely understood, if not universally applied. Neighbors watching the work offered mixed assessments. Some recognized the logic immediately, drawing parallels to soddy construction or earth lodges. Others saw regression, burying a log cabin in dirt, making it look like a dugout, moving backward from proper above-ground framing toward crude, earth-sheltered methods associated with first-year poverty or indigenous building. The aesthetic objection carried social weight. Frame houses elevated on piers signaled progress, success, and American building standards. Earth-banked cabins signaled temporary expedience, immigrant stubbornness, or unwillingness to adopt modern methods. The tension between thermal performance and cultural signaling shaped adoption patterns across the territory. From the road, the completed perimeter treatment looked like overkill, or a step backwards toward a soddy. On thermometers placed at floor level inside the cabin, it represented the difference between radiating heat to the sky all night and radiating heat back into the room where it mattered. Normal pattern in raised floor cabins, constant feeding of the stove late into the evening to maintain comfort, then early morning relights just to warm the floor enough for bare feet. Families burned wood not primarily to heat the living space, but to compensate for continuous floor losses. The cycle was predictable and punishing. Stoke at bedtime, wake to cold boards, burn through morning kindling to raise floor temperatures back to tolerable levels. Repeat. Stone belly pattern. 1 or 2 strong late-day burns to charge the stone mass, then slower overnight cooling. The operational hypothesis was straightforward. Instead of fighting continuous heat loss with continuous fuel input, store heat in mass during evening hours when the family was active and the stove was being used for cooking anyway, then rely on stored heat radiating upward through the night. Applied physics in plain terms. Stone has a heat capacity roughly twice that of water per unit mass and far higher per unit volume than air or wood. Heating 10 tons of stone by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius required significant energy input, roughly equivalent to burning 10 to 20 pounds of dry wood. But once heated, the stone released that energy slowly over 8 to 12 hours, moderating temperature swings and reducing the need for overnight stoking. Stove positioning mattered. Placing the stove near the geometric center of the floor maximized stone exposure to radiant and convective heat. Peripheral stove locations, common in conventional cabins to keep heat near walls and away from the central living space, worked against the stone belly concept by heating only a fraction of the mass. Operating pattern: build a hot fire in late afternoon and maintain it through the evening meal and evening chores. Let the fire burn down to coals by bedtime. Close the damper partway to retain residual heat and allow the fire to die completely overnight. By morning, the stone mass had cooled but remained noticeably warmer than outdoor temperatures, radiating stored heat upward through the planks. Period wood consumption data provided rough baselines. Uninsulated, raised floor cabins in the northern plains typically burned 5 to 8 cords of seasoned wood per winter, depending on cabin size, stove efficiency, and family habits. Earth-sheltered dugouts and sod houses with their high mass construction and earth contact floors often burned 3 to 5 cords for comparable interior volumes. Estimated energy stored in the stone belly from a typical evening heating cycle. If the mass warmed from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, a 15-degree rise. The stored heat totaled roughly 150 to 200,000 British thermal units. For comparison, burning 10 pounds of dry hardwood released approximately 90,000 British thermal units. The stone mass, once charged, provided heat equivalent to multiple stove loads spread over many hours. Observed differences in morning conditions became the practical test. Raised floor cabins, frost on interior board surfaces, ice in water, pails placed on or near the floor, children sleeping in boots. Stone belly cabin, cool but unfrosted boards, water pails liquid though cold, barefoot morning chores, feasible, if uncomfortable. By December, the ledger showed a small but steady gap. Where similar cabins had burned through 5 cords, the stone belly cabin had consumed just over 4 cords, a reduction on the order of 15 to 20%. The real test, though, had not yet arrived. Moderate cold-tested efficiency, killing cold-tested survival. Signal service stations across Dakota and Montana logged temperatures that redefined what cold meant on the northern plains. Dawn readings between -40 and -50 degrees Fahrenheit persisted for days. Daytime highs failed to reach -10 degrees Fahrenheit for a full week. Wind speeds ranged from 15 to 30 miles per hour, driving effective temperatures far below thermometer readings. Outdoor catastrophe, free-range cattle, caught by crusted snow and unable to reach forage, died by the tens of thousands. Ranch foremen recorded losses approaching 50% of herd totals in the hardest-hit districts. Drifts buried fence lines. Stock tanks froze solid despite being chopped open multiple times per day. The cold wave was not a single storm, but a sustained Arctic air mass that settled over the region and refused to lift. Indoor test. 3 building types in the same air mass provided a natural experiment. Raised floor log cabins, sod houses and dugouts, and the stone belly cabin all faced identical external conditions. The differences in interior outcomes documented the role of thermal mass and earth contact. Raised floor cabins, interior readings taken at floor level after a standard evening firing, and 6 to 8 hours with no active fire showed temperatures dropping to within 5 to 10 degrees of outdoor readings by dawn. Ice formed in water pails placed on floors. Frost appeared on boards and on the interior surfaces of walls near floor level. Families burned wood through the night just to prevent the interior from reaching outdoor temperatures. Sod houses and dugouts. Floor-level temperatures remained above freezing even after the fire died completely. Walls and floors, in direct contact with earth and wrapped in massive soil cover, changed temperature slowly enough that a single evening fire kept the interior tolerable through the night. Memoirs consistently noted that occupants of earth-sheltered structures slept warm, while neighbors in frame cabins burned all night and still woke cold. Stone belly cabin, floor-level temperature readings at dawn, after a strong evening burn followed by 8 hours with no fire, showed temperatures holding in the mid-30s to low 40s Fahrenheit, well above freezing and significantly warmer than raised floor cabins in identical conditions. Water pails placed on the floor remained liquid. No frost formed on board surfaces. The stone mass charged during evening hours released stored heat through the night, moderating the floor environment enough to prevent freezing. The mechanism was simple and observable. Same stove, same evening wood consumption, different overnight outcomes depending on whether heat radiated into mass or into air that washed away under an open floor. The stone belly floor did not make the cabin warm. Interior temperatures still dropped significantly overnight. But it kept the boards from acting like frozen metal at dawn. Weather logs and memoirs recorded the human cost of the cold wave. References to water froze in the pail by the stove appeared in multiple accounts from conventional cabins. Families described sleeping in coats and boots, waking to frost on interior walls, and burning through wood supplies at unsustainable rates just to prevent freezing. In the worst week of the worst winter in territorial memory, the stone belly floor demonstrated its function. Not luxury, not convenience, but the difference between barefoot dawn chores and another hour spent burning kindling just to make the floor surface tolerable enough for children to stand on. Assumption in most settler households: winter hardship was fixed. Cold floors were unavoidable. The solution was thicker socks, more blankets, and acceptance of daily discomfort as the price of living in severe climate. The idea that building design could fundamentally alter this equation was rarely considered. Outcome: small thermal differences at floor level translated into measurable health and productivity differences. A few degrees of temperature, sustained over weeks and months, accumulated into real consequences for bodies and work schedules. Frontier doctors' notes and schoolteacher diaries documented the pattern. Chilblains, painful inflammation of skin on feet and hands caused by repeated exposure to cold and damp, appeared more frequently in families occupying raised floor cabins than in those living in sod houses or earth lodges. The correlation was not absolute, but the trend was consistent enough to appear in medical records from multiple counties. Respiratory issues showed similar patterns. Constant cold drafts at floor level, combined with large temperature gradients between floor and ceiling, created convective air currents that carried dust and dried the mucous membranes. Families in high-mass, earth-contact structures reported fewer persistent coughs and colds during extended cold periods, though other factors, crowding, nutrition, general hygiene, certainly influenced outcomes as well. The link between floor temperature and minor injuries was more direct. Cold boards numbed feet, reducing sensation and increasing the likelihood of cuts, splinters, and bruises that went unnoticed until infection risk rose. Warm or moderately cool floors allowed normal sensation, letting occupants respond immediately to hazards. Work implications extended beyond health. Raised floor cabins required significant early morning labor simply to raise interior temperatures to functional levels. Families burned through kindling supplies, spent 30 to 60 minutes coaxing fires back to useful heat, and delayed outdoor chores, stock care, snow clearance, equipment repair, until the cabin was tolerable. The lost hour or two at the start of each winter day accumulated into significant seasonal labor deficits. Stone belly cabins and earth-sheltered structures allowed families to begin productive work immediately upon waking. The floor was cool but not frozen. Water for cooking and washing was liquid. The morning fire, when built, was for cooking and heating wash water, not for emergency warming of the living space. The time savings, though modest on any single day, compounded over a 6-month heating season into dozens of additional productive hours. Indigenous accounts of earth lodge comfort, recorded by ethnographers and missionaries, emphasized the same point. Stable interior conditions reduced daily survival overhead, freeing time and energy for other activities. The contrast between earth lodges and early missionary-built frame structures was often noted, with occupants of the frame buildings spending far more time on heating and basic comfort maintenance. Period references to sleeping in boots and children with sore feet appeared regularly in memoirs from conventional cabins. These were not poetic descriptions, but practical adaptations to chronic cold floors. Boots worn to bed preserved foot warmth and reduced morning shock when stepping onto frozen planks. The practice was normalized, accepted as necessary, until families experienced alternatives. On paper, the stone belly floor shifted floor-level temperatures by 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, a modest change in absolute terms. In ledgers tracking wood consumption and diaries noting daily routines, it shifted the line between burn all morning just to start and work all morning while the fire builds. The difference was not comfort in the modern sense, but functional capacity in a survival economy where every hour and every cord mattered. Outcome: the method worked. Technical performance in the winter of 1886 to 1887 confirmed that a stone-filled floor mass, properly installed and sealed, reduced fuel consumption and improved floor-level comfort in severe cold. The physics was sound, the materials were locally available. The labor, while substantial, was within reach of most homesteading families. Historical record, very few explicit mentions or surviving examples. County histories describing frontier building practices focused on the progression from dugout to sod house to frame house, with little attention paid to hybrid methods like stone belly floors. Archaeological surveys of homestead sites rarely found evidence of deliberate underfloor stone masses, distinct from foundation piers or hearth bases. The disconnect between proven effectiveness and low adoption stemmed from multiple pressures, most of them non-technical. Homestead Act proving requirements created time pressure. To secure final title, claimants had to reside on the land for 5 years, cultivate a specified acreage, and construct a habitable dwelling. The law did not specify construction quality, only that a structure existed and was occupied. Families arriving on claims in spring faced a race: build shelter, break, sod, plant crops, and establish residence before winter or before capital ran out. Every week spent on elaborate construction was a week not spent on the land improvements that would generate income. Quick builds won under these constraints. A conventional raised floor cabin could be framed and enclosed in 1 to 2 weeks with 2 adults working. A stone belly floor required an additional 1 to 2 weeks for excavation, stone hauling, and careful assembly. For families on tight timelines and tighter budgets, the trade-off was clear: accept higher fuel costs later in exchange for faster occupancy now. Material changes accelerated the trend away from improvised thermal mass. Railroads delivered cheap dimensional lumber, pre-cut joists, and eventually coal for heating. By the late 1880s and 1890s, coal from Wyoming and Montana fields reached Plains depots at prices competitive with cordwood in many districts. Coal burned hotter and longer than wood, reducing the labor burden of constant stoking. With coal, the penalty of poor thermal design diminished. Families could simply burn more fuel rather than redesigning their floors. Concrete and manufactured cement arrived in the 1890s and early 1900s, offering a new solution to cold floors. Poured concrete slabs over gravel fill became the recommended practice in agricultural bulletins by 1905 to 1910, marketed as sanitary and modern. Concrete required no stone hauling or careful hand-laying. It could be mixed and poured in a single day, creating a continuous, dense thermal mass with minimal skill. Once concrete became accessible, hand-placed stone floors were obsolete. Cultural factors shaped adoption as strongly as logistics. Earth-sheltered and earth-contact construction carried associations with poverty, temporary expedients, and indigenous building methods that many settlers actively sought to leave behind. County histories and personal memoirs describe the transition from dugout to frame house as a mark of success, a progression toward American norms. Banking a cabin with earth or embedding its floor in stone reversed that progression, signaling either ignorance of proper methods or stubbornness in clinging to old country or indigenous practices. Official efforts to move native populations out of earth lodges and into frame houses reinforced these associations. Missionaries, Indian agents, and educators promoted frame construction as civilized and modern, implicitly or explicitly marking earth-based methods as backward. Settlers adopting earth contact techniques risked social judgment, regardless of technical merit. Land office clerks, lumber dealers, and county officials reinforced conventional methods through example and advice. Model homesteads featured in promotional materials showed tidy frame cabins on raised foundations, not earth-banked hybrids. Lumber dealers sold joists and sill timbers, not instructions, for excavating stone-filled pans. The result, Mechanically, the stone belly floor was simple and effective. Culturally and economically, it was out of step with the direction of frontier settlement. History tends to follow habit, supply chains, and social signaling more than physics. What worked best in the worst conditions was often what families were most eager to abandon once capital, materials, and modern fuel sources became available. Past improvisation, hand-hauled stone and sand under a one-room cabin, assembled with simple tools and local materials, driven by fuel scarcity and cold that killed livestock in open fields. The method was a response to immediate survival pressure, not a systematic engineering approach. Modern standard, engineered slabs, insulated floors, radiant heating, masonry heaters designed with calculated thermal performance and predictable outcomes. Contemporary building science codified what frontier families discovered by necessity, that mass placed correctly within the thermal envelope modulates temperature swings and reduces peak heating loads. Agricultural bulletins from the early 20th century recommended concrete floors poured over compacted gravel for farmhouses and barns, citing improved sanitation, reduced pest access, and ease of cleaning. The thermal benefit, stable floor temperatures and reduced heat loss, was mentioned but not emphasized. The focus was hygiene and modernity, not fuel efficiency. By 1910, concrete slabs were standard in new rural construction wherever cement was available. The transition from wood joists over air to concrete over gravel paralleled the shift from wood fuel to coal and kerosene, and later to oil and natural gas. As heating fuels became cheaper and more energy-dense, the incentive to optimize building envelopes for fuel efficiency diminished. Mass floors remained thermally superior, but the advantage mattered less when fuel was abundant. Contemporary off-grid cabin builders and living history interpreters rediscovered the principles in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Modern insulated slabs, concrete poured over rigid foam insulation and gravel drainage layers, function identically to stone belly floors in concept. Dense mass inside the thermal envelope, storing heat during warm periods and releasing it during cool periods, reducing temperature swings and fuel demand. The materials and installation methods are industrialized, but the physics is unchanged. Masonry heaters and radiant floor systems represent formalized versions of the same concept. A masonry heater stores heat in tons of brick or stone surrounding a firebox, radiating warmth for 12 to 24 hours after a single firing. Radiant floors circulate warm water or air through pipes or channels embedded in concrete slabs, using the mass of the floor as a distributed heat emitter. Both rely on thermal mass and strategic placement within the insulated envelope, the lessons encoded in the stone belly floor. Key figures remain relevant: 8 to 12 inches of excavation, 8 to 12 tons of stone or equivalent mass, 10 to 15 degrees Celsius overnight lag, 10 to 20% heat loss reduction through properly detailed floors. These numbers, derived from improvisation on the 1880s plains, align closely with modern building science calculations for thermal mass effectiveness in residential construction. The method still makes sense in specific contexts: stone-rich, fuel-poor sites without machinery, reconstructions of historical structures for interpretive purposes, off-grid cabins where simplicity and local materials outweigh access to manufactured products. The labor is still substantial, the rewards are still modest but real. The trade-offs are still visible in woodpile height and morning barefoot comfort. What started as an improvised stone bed under a one-room house now reads like a stripped-down version of the details in modern energy-efficient floor assemblies. The principle discovered by necessity on the northern plains, that mass underfoot, properly sealed and positioned, buys time and fuel, was later codified in building science, lost in the rush toward cheap energy, and rediscovered again as energy costs and environmental awareness rose. The cycle continues. Popular image of the log cabin. Focus on wall texture, corner notching, roof pitch, and rustic appearance. The floor is assumed, unremarked, a functional necessity that draws no attention. Historical reconstructions and museum displays emphasize the visible, the height of walls, the materials of roofs, the placement of doors and windows. Usually unseen decisions underfoot determined winter comfort and fuel use far more than any detail of wall or roof. The difference between a raised, aired floor and a mass contact floor shaped daily experience in ways that wall logs never could. The floor was where bare feet touched reality every dawn. The floor was where children played, where families gathered around the stove, where cold air pooled and heat escaped. Museum curators and local historians reading from county records note the progression. Dugouts as first shelters, then sod houses, then frame cabins, then eventually proper farmhouses with basements and modern materials. The progression is presented as inevitable, a march toward better conditions and American standards. The story is accurate but incomplete. Tribal educators explaining Earth Lodge performance add context. Earth lodges documented by ethnographers and later archaeological surveys showed sophisticated thermal design, massive walls and roofs, small openings, central hearths positioned to maximize radiant heating of the structure itself. Interior temperatures remained stable across seasons with minimal fuel input. The structures worked because the builders understood mass, contact, and the value of slow temperature change. Displayed artifacts, simple mercury thermometers used to document interior conditions, ledgers noting cordwood purchases and stovewood hauls, masonry fragments from lodge floors and chimney bases, period carpentry manuals recommending limewash and tear for buried timbers. Each artifact represents a piece of the knowledge that informed floor design on the frontier. Quoted line from an 1890s county history: "The earth lodges of the Mandan remained warm in the deepest winter, while the frame houses of the mission required constant fires." The observation was ethnographic, not judgmental, but it captured the technical reality. Mass and earth contact solved problems that frame construction and raised floors could not. Ledger note from a Homestead account book, 1888. Wood purchased this winter, 4 cords. Last winter in the old cabin, 6 cords. Saved 2 cords and the price of hauling. The entry is factual, unadorned, focused on economics rather than comfort. The fuel savings translated directly into cash or labor retained for other uses. The cause and effect chain, when families heated from the floor up, through earth, stone, or later concrete, they reduced daily thermal shock and seasonal fuel vulnerability. The floor became part of the heating system rather than a passive barrier or an active heat sink. The shift required extra labor during construction and acceptance of methods associated with earth contact building, but the return was measurable and sustained over every winter the structure stood. On the northern plains, the homesteads that quietly put mass under their feet, sod, earth, or stone, left fewer diary entries about frozen buckets and burning through the night. They left more entries about work finished before spring, about wood left in the pile at season's end, about children sleeping without boots. The legend remembers the walls and the roofs, the visible markers of shelter. The ledgers remember the floor.